then we'll get started right now. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for coming to the last AMT meeting of the YKL Rapid Ecoregional Assessment. For those of you on the phone, we have a new kind of phone system where it's through the ceiling, so please let us know if you ever can't hear us. We'll try to adjust so that we can change that and keep you following along. So the purpose of today's meeting is, of course, to hear about the results of the assessment. And if you haven't already, I highly encourage you all to read the report that the UA has posted on their website. It has a lot of pages, and it's in 5 documents, but I read through most of it over the last few days, and it's not 800 pages of pure text, and it actually went a lot faster for me than I thought it would. And I think it's written really well, clearly, in a easy to understand kind of plain language narrative. So I think that you'll all be very impressed with it, as I was. And it's obvious that they put a lot of time and effort into it. I think they did a really good job at incorporating our suggestions, especially about having data gaps and limitations in every section. And I think that that'll help managers really understand the current state of climate science and landscape science. And that's, I think, a really helpful aspect of it. And that info, the limitations and data gaps, is also kind of collected into one document at the end, which I think is also really helpful, and I think that will help people in the BLM and other agencies a lot. And I guess I won't take too long, since we'll probably introduce ourselves in the next step. And, yeah. I really like the document. It's really long. Everyone should read through it, or maybe just, the section that they are most interested in.
Right.
And
that's a good way to start the meeting. Good morning, I'm Meg King, and I've been helping to facilitate and kind of heard this effort to some degree. Who's on the phone? I'm pretty sure we had folks who were supposed to be from Fairbanks. Eric?
This is...
Yeah, the Fairbanks district is on the phone. Let's go around here. I'm Steve Hartman, the district manager.
Lee Hampler, GIS specialist.
Tim Hammond, assistant field manager for Central Yukon.
Kelly Jacobson, field manager for Central Yukon.
That's it for us.
Right.
Eric Geisler, Alaska State Office. Matt Varner, Alaska State Office.
Stephanie Martin, ICER.
Right.
Karen Bedoni, Fish Wildlife Service in Galena.
Wow. Okay, that's good. Anyone else?
Hoping that the LCC folks would be joining us this morning, too, Amanda Robertson, but maybe she'll join later.
Okay, online or in person?
I think online.
Okay. That'd be great. If you see it pop up there, we'll just let us know what you're saying. So, here in the room, I'm going to go to the back row. Keith?
Keith Boggs, Alaska National Heritage Program at UAA. Matt Carlson, Heritage Program, UAA.
Walker Warfali, ICER, UAA.
Tim Naraki, Heritage Program, UAA.
Let me just check in. So, folks on the phone, could you hear them?
A little quiet, but they're okay.
Okay. Okay. So,
Monica McTeague, Heritage Program.
Jamie Trammell, Heritage Program, UAA.
Nancy Fresco, SNAP Program, UAF.
Leah Kenny, Heritage Program. Courtney Emerson, USGS.
Scott Geyer, BLM Alaska State Office.
Karen Kelleher, BLM Anchorage District.
Sarah Taylor, Alaska Department of Natural Resources.
Doug Blue, Anchorage Field Office, BLM.
Ikumi Aisa, AKNC.
Tina Daly, Anchorage Field Office. Aliza Segal, Anchorage Field Office.
great. Good. Yeah, well, Meg, I think I already said that. Great. So that's really, really good. The only handout that we have is the agenda. And I think that's a really good sign. Keep it simple. So really the first part of today's agenda is to do an overview and talk about kind of the big picture and and the integrated products is how we're going to kick it off. And then we're going to continue with kind of that summary from each of the primary leads in their respective areas to talk about what they thought was most important from what they found. So just to give folks a snapshot, an overview, and then in the afternoon and tomorrow we're going to drill down a little bit further with each of those areas. So that's, that's all I'm going to say about the agenda. You guys have it in front of you. You can see how it's timed out and exactly who's doing what. And it, of course, will fluctuate a little bit, but for the most part, we're going to try and hang to that. I think that really that's about it. I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
You're starting off with a question, Karen. Don't grill us yet. The agenda. I was wondering if because it made me think that when Aliza was talking, at that point, can you guys maybe indicate what data gaps you thought were most problematic for you overall? Have you guys thought about that? Like, which of the ones are the most critical and would be the most beneficial to fill in this geographic data?
Yeah, we have per section, definitely. Most relevant data gaps to kind of help improve whatever models or interpretations. We haven't necessarily prioritized, but we have pulled them all into that, data gap section at the end. Yeah, there could be opportunity for prioritization but it really depends. I mean, the data gaps are kind of across the board, and you'll see, how we have worked around them or used other data to substitute or how we approached it. But yeah.
So you'll talk.
We'll talk about them,
okay,
explicitly today.
Okay.
And tomorrow. Yep.
Excellent. Thanks. Hopefully we've done a really good job in the report, so that's another place to look. Like Aliza said, we kind of highlighted them as their own section so that can be an easy, tangible document just to look at them, and then we also kind of reminded everybody about the management questions that we couldn't address and why we couldn't do it as part of the submitted questions. And then, in addition to that, per section, we have it listed within each of our sections in the report, and then, in addition, we are very redundant in some ways, but we also listed in the introduction kind of what are the general assumptions and limitations with doing a regional assessment, which are different than, kind of, there's multiple scales, like Amy said. So we've tried to do a good job noting that that's kind of a really important product from the RE. So, but if we haven't, please let us know.
Or if you want more information on the data gaps, this is obviously something we thought an awful lot about, and spent most waking hours wishing and hoping that we find something similar. So that's something I think all of us would be happy to engage in discussions with afterwards.
Yeah, and that really was a great question, and so because we're actually running ahead of time, happens a lot at the beginning of an agenda, beginning of a meeting. Does anybody else have questions like that they're really hoping that there'll be a bit of a focus on? Anybody up in Fairbanks? Okay. Thank you,
We're
Karen.
counting on you, Karen, to keep the discussion lively today.
Okay, Monica.
So I'm not going to really reiterate here too much, just trying to figure out how to figure out the display here and how we're going to be presenting. So try not to ignore you by staring at the screen. But so we're going to really, again, the goals are on the agenda to showcase our products. And we're really pretty excited. This is kind of a culmination of 2 years of work. And I was just thinking today we started at the end of my maternity leave just so that I could kind of dive into the project, and my daughter just turned 2. So it has been officially 2 years since I started working on this project. So we're excited not only to finish the project because we started with the S&K and didn't quite make it to this step, but we're also really proud of our products, and this is really, our opportunity to kind of show you what we've done and how we've improved on the S&K, and also gives us the opportunity to kind of look forward. So we're excited for folks that are working on our other REAs to join us too, so that we can continually make our products better. It's really been kind of an interesting scientific exercise, not just maybe I should say, it's a scientific endeavor more than just an exercise, so it hasn't been a boilerplate approach, so we've been really, some ways struggled with it, but we're excited to show the final product, so we're glad you're here. And we also, as we have throughout these meetings, we've always asked for kind of this collective review and provided input, and this is kind of your final opportunity as part of a meeting format to provide us some of that feedback. But just to kind of go quickly over the schedule where we're going forward here is, in addition to this kind of technical document that we posted, we're also working towards developing an executive summary that will kind of be the culmination of all of our take-home messages, which is somewhat reflected in this morning's presentation, where we're kind of just going over the major points. This will be what we're envisioning a 30-page document, so it would be something that you might actually read. Not that you're not going to read the other 800 pages. We're counting on you all, but if you do have an opportunity to maybe synthesize, or if you had a few things you wanted to tell your neighbor about what an REA was, this would be the document that you'd look forward to reading. So we're working hard on that, and we've been actually consulting with other REAs throughout the nation that have also been trying to develop this kind of synthesized document, so we're excited about that. So I guess the first date here is June 12th, which will have a summary of this meeting, this two-day meeting, and then the 26th date is when we're asking for your feedback, if you have any written feedback on the technical documents we've produced, and then we're developing that executive summary. And then July 25th, a month after that, will give us time to actually finalize all of our reports, incorporate any feedback we get, and then deliver all of our data and materials. So that's kind of our draft dead date for the project. So Meg kind of went over the agenda, so I'm not going to reiterate here. Basically, we have this morning is kind of our high-level overview, and then we have a lunch, which we've provided. So in part, we're trying to keep you hostage here, so hopefully you'll enjoy it, but we're also going to have kind of some informal discussions, and then this afternoon we're going to dive right into our more in-depth conversation. So if we're going to start with our change agents, and then on Friday morning we're going to start into our conservation elements, and then move into those integrated products. And I guess I did want to say, thinking about this agenda, and other REAs, these final product meetings are maybe even span a week of time. And throughout our product meetings, we've tried to kind of truncate them, so I know you might think it's kind of a laborious time to spend with us, but really thinking about the amount of products we have, for any of these topics, we could probably spend a week talking about them independently. So really it has been a struggle just to get it to fit in this day and a half time. So, but thank you for committing to that time.
Hey, Monica, this is Cindy up in Fairbanks. Could I ask a question real quick? I didn't jump in before you went through that agenda, but that July 25th deadline for you guys to deliver your final product, does that mean that will be on your web page, or is this data also getting shipped to our BLM NOC and then they're going to turn around and make it available, or how are we going to actually get all this stuff?
Right. So there were some more dates. There's probably some more dates in there that maybe I should float around. I was going to kind of talk about them as kind of our next steps at the final day of the meeting, but so we do, kind of in the interim, we've hosted all of our products and all of our documents that we've delivered on our own internal web page, but as part of the BLM REA process, all the REAs get posted on the web page that the BLM hosts. So that will be there. There's a lot of kind of QA/QC that goes on between us, and we've already started that process, but it takes a bit of time to get it posted. I think with the SNK, it's not even available online, and that product finished quite some time ago, but we're anticipating this should go a little bit better, just based on our kind of working relationship with the NOC. But eventually it will, and what I was just going to also add is that in addition to our final products meeting, we also have kind of built into our schedule some communication meetings where we will kind of talk specifically with the BLM about some applications of our data that we've built into our project, and that will come sometime, maybe even 6 months after we actually deliver our data, in the hopes that it will be posted on your website and we can walk through that with you. And Scott, I know, is working with the BLM to possibly also some more additional outreach
On the training.
Right.
Training for
there will
this
be
project.
not specific to this, there will be a REA training this fall, scheduled for late September. There'll be a training in Anchorage and also in Fairbanks, and it will be a training on how to use the REA data, but it will be specifically in the training utilizing the S&K data that will be available by then. So what I don't know is how soon the data will become available. This YKL data will become available at the NOC on their web portal. So they have to do a QA/QC, or have you guys have given them some products already, but they will take some time for them to go through that. However, the report should be on the National BLM website fairly soon. So the data will come a little bit later based on the NOC schedule. So I can't answer that. We'd have to talk with Megan. Megan at the NOC, she might be able to provide some kind of parameter on when that might be up and available on the report.
But they're expecting it, and so they said at least that they were expecting it so that they'll have a group of people ready to QAC quicker, and so I think it will happen faster than S&K, right?
Right.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the S&K data, they didn't even get started on QA/QCing that till at least 6 months or later after it was received. They were just backlogged. So it's good news that they're ready for this YKL data. They're prepared for it, and they should be a much smoother review period and a much sooner results as far as getting it out to the public.
But Cindy, if you do need data prior to the actual official release of the data, we're happy to work with you, or we could work with Aliza or Megan at the NOC to get any of that data. So, yeah, just let us know. We'll be in touch, but the report material should be available immediately, and then all the actual additional data will at some point be posted online, so stay tuned.
And this is Steve in Fairbanks. I've got another question. You're providing lunch there in Anchorage. What time can we expect ours delivered here in Fairbanks?
So Nancy's here as our representative, and she can take some home, and it will be delivered.
I usually get to be on all the teleconferences when they're talking about where they're going to eat after the phone call, and when the potluck's going to be.
Yeah, we do have regular potlucks. Anchorage-centric here. So the kind of our outline of our document, we're calling it the technical supplement, but how it's organized in multiple 5 different sections. And the first one's our introduction, and this is really kind of the overview of what an REA is, what our general approach and the process of an REA is, and then again, those kind of general assumptions that we were talking about and limitations, which are, the high-level data gaps of any REA, basically. And then we go right into our change agents, where we go talk about climate change, fire, soil thermodynamics, species, and development. Okay, and we have section C, which is the landscape and ecological integrity. And then our section D, which is all the conservation elements. And again, we have specifically identified sections user, data gaps, and omissions.
Hey, people on the phone, can you guys please mute when you're not talking?
Okay. sounds better, and I don't know, we could also turn down the volume, yeah.
Yeah, I think the volume was coming through really.
Great button. Sure, yeah. Okay, perfect, yeah, it is great. All right, so our project team, many of you have been in this room a fair amount, so I don't really want to reiterate, except that when I was looking at old slides, I recognized that oftentimes we include ourselves as the University of Alaska team, and we, in addition to obviously the Heritage Program and folks at Thurs and SNAP, and then McTeague as our community engagement facilitator, we also want to make sure to recognize that throughout our project team, we also include the BLM as that project team. This project has been a cooperative agreement, so we've been every 2 weeks we have biweekly team meetings, which the BLM has been involved in those meetings and discussions, and has really helped us form the project and help the process all along. So it's not a typical contractor relationship where we kind of come and present. It's really been an exchange and dialogue throughout.
Yeah, can I say something about that? This is Meg, and Monica early on said that they were really proud of their project and their working relationship with their team. But I think they're equally proud of the working relationship they've engendered with the Bureau of Land Management and the other agencies, and in particular, I should say, the NOT too, which is not an easy thing to coordinate with being out of state. But I think that Aliza's reflection of the document and looking at it and saying that they've really captured the things that we asked them to and to focus on is reflection of that relationship and the respectful relationship that you guys have to it.
You can add the Fairbanks office as part of the team under BLM.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I should definitely, sorry to not exclude anybody. I was just thinking of the folks that met biweekly in these particular YKL meetings, but I guess Jen was part of that team, so I'm sorry. That was a purposeful exclusion there. Yeah, thanks, Jen. I don't know if Jen's actually on the phone, but thanks.
Yeah, Jen's with us.
Okay, yeah, I would actually like to add that she was the diehard representative from Fairbanks, joining us pretty much for every team meeting, which her counterpart at the Acreage Field Office wasn't as active in those meetings. Not to say that Karen hasn't been a great AMT chair, but yes, I should definitely highlight the Fairbanks Field Office there. I also want to highlight as part of the REAs we have this assessment management team, a technical team that many of you are part of, and just wanted to acknowledge kind of the various organizations that have been part of this process. So all the various people at the BLM, I've probably forgotten people, so again, excuse me for that. The Fish and Wildlife Service, the USGS, the Park Service, and the State of Alaska. And really, this has been a great opportunity to have a review throughout the project. And also, I just wanted to highlight one of the really great things about working on some of these regional assessments is actually some of the dialogue that's happened between these agencies. And, you know, a lot of times when you read literature about some ecoregional assessments, that's highlighted as one of maybe the more valuable products or final concluding thoughts, is that there have been exchanges of dialogue that might not have happened if you were going to only focus in on your resource area. And I'm not gonna harp over where the process is or how long it took us to get there in the 18 months, but I did want to just kind of reiterate throughout the process we have had a series of workshops and webinars throughout both kind of our initial phase and our analysis, the second phase of our project. And through each of these, just to remind people, every time we've had a workshop or a meeting or a document out, we've asked for feedback, and we've been able to incorporate that feedback. So again, it hasn't been that we've independently been working, so we really feel proud that we have had that exchange, and hopefully that will help make the material all that more useful. And just to provide some context, I wanted to remind people about the land ownership of the region, the land status. Again, it's the majority landowner here is the state at about 40%, with the BLM about 26%, and then Fish and Wildlife Service at 18%. Sorry, I just heard a addition on the phone, so I thought I would check to see somebody doing that. Oh, Andy. Okay. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Angie.
All right. And again, in addition to kind of the AMT, our UA, our project team, we also engage landowners and stakeholders, so I didn't want to forget this part of the project either. We had 3 community meetings where we actually went out and talked with the community about how the project was going to proceed, and then we also kind of continued that dialogue with periodic newsletters that included those regional communities and then kind of outside of those regions as well throughout the process. And just to, not to couch our products or to make it seem like we haven't done a good job, I just wanted to remind people that, again, REAs are rapid. They're really fast. We produce a lot in a short time frame. And the reason I wanted to kind of remind people of that is that we really just scratched the surface, and we think basically one of the greatest tools that we've been able to provide is really this data that we can hand over to the managers. And the analysis, we've kind of started that discussion and we've started that exchange, but we hope that we'll pass on the data and the analysis will really get fleshed out with the managers that will actually be using the data. And I grabbed this typical duration of different activities within the framework for ecological monitoring on lands of Alaska National Wildlife Refuges and their partners. That was done by Woodard and Beaver in 2010, just to kind of highlight that, a very small portion of our project, which is kind of summarizing resources, processes, drivers, and gradients, and then creating those conceptual models. We're assigning a typical duration of almost, over 2 years just to get those products out, which is just a very small fraction of what we were able to accomplish with our REAs. That's the conceptual model. So just again, I wanted to highlight how fast we were able to produce these products and kind of where some of the limitations of doing that, but also the asset that we've been able to kind of summarize the state of knowledge within this 18-month time frame. So that's all I have to say. Were there any more questions about where we're going with the meeting, or? Okay. All right, so I'm just going to jump in.
Hi, well, welcome. I'm Jamie Trammell. I'm the sort of project manager for the REA, so I'm going to provide the almost 60,000-foot view of the REA, just as a quick reminder of all the elements and all the key components and some of the key limitations of a rapid ecoregional assessment. And I'm going to go into a summary of some of the integrated products we've created as part of this process. So just a quick reminder to bring everybody back up to speed, because not all of you live, eat, breathe, drink REAs for the last 2 years. You may not remember all these components, but the overall goal of an REA is to describe ecological conditions and trends, identify natural human influences, map and describe species distributions, identify regionally important habitats, and gauge the potential of how these species and habitats might be impacted by agents of change. So that's, remember, the overall framework. And so to do this, we have 3 main components. We have management questions that were derived from you, the AMT, as well as management concerns that we were able to elicit either through community meetings or engagement with other managers. We have these conservation elements, and you'll hear them referred to as CEs throughout. We apologize for the jargon, but it's a rapid presentation. There's a lot of information here, but conservation elements I'll define in a second. But it's basically species and habitats. And then these agents of change, or change agents, and these are partially mandated by the BLM at the national level to include climate change, fire, invasive species, and land use and development. We've included some others like permafrost as well, to make it more specific to Alaska. And there's these two tracks. You can kind of think of REAs really bringing together management and scientific needs at an ecoregional scale. We have the management track where it focuses on the management questions. We've identified these, again, with your help, as kind of the key things that need to be answered on the landscape now. These are the most important issues that we want to have some answers or some idea of at the ecoregional scale. And that helps us identify what species we focus on, what habitats we focus on. We also have a scientific ecosystem or an intrinsic kind of perspective where we're looking at ecosystem integrity. We're looking at the whole system, how it operates, what are the key components, and how do they interact. And we're using that to identify what are the key species we should be focusing on, how are the change agents interacting with them. So we have this conceptual framework, and we have this purely applied management kind of framework that we're using. This is a more graphical view of that interrelationship, how everything kind of comes together. And so you don't have to worry too much, other than seeing that really management questions delivered, are used to derive specific data sets. They also have results. They're all kind of geospatial, but we also have, on the conceptual side, developing models, developing results. And so this is truly an integrated assessment, both in terms of management and conceptual science, as well as in terms of the data itself. So this is the conceptual model we developed for the ecoregion. Again, it's just kind of describing some of those key players in the landscape, key ecosystem resources, both habitat, larger habitat, and as well as specific species, how those interact, or how we think those interact with kind of biophysical settings or climate and atmospheric conditions, those ecosystem drivers, and then specifically how they relate with the change agents that we've been tasked to assess in the REA. And so this is, for the entire ecoregion, we've developed it. And these are the REA elements, just to remind you specifically. We've got a suite of terrestrial species that we focused on, as well as terrestrial habitats. We have a few aquatic habitats that we've looked at, and then a suite of aquatic species that we looked at. And that comprises our conservation elements. Those are basically the primary metric for assessing impact from all the climate or fire and permafrost and invasive species and land use development. And so those are the CAs over there you can see to the right, all the change agents that we specifically focused on and assess the relationship to these conservation elements. So this is, again, the basic elements that we used in this. And so in addition to kind of mapping that overall, goal of the REA is to map species distributions and habitats, and understand where change agents are, we have this integrated analysis too, where we're saying, okay, we know where the species and the habitats are that are most important. We know where the change agents are. Where are those species and habitats going to be in the future? How are those change agents going to change in the future? How do they overlap? And that overlap is the hardest part, because we can all develop species models, and we can have some idea of how they might change in the future, intrinsically. But putting those two together, I mean, this is climate science. This is like the meat and potatoes of most landscape ecology questions right now. It's how do you integrate climate and fire and permafrost, all these things, and how do you look at those overlap with species of interest or habitats of interest? And so that's what I'm going to kind of focus on for my quick summary. Just also a reminder, when we're talking about current and future distributions or current and future time periods, these are what we're talking about. Current is really just current, which is actually probably a 10-year composite of the last 10 years or so, depending on when species models were developed and climate models were developed. But we have this near-term and long-term that you'll see throughout the presentation and throughout the document. Just to remind you, the near-term is 2025, so it's really only about 10 years out now. So it's kind of a short time period. And then the long-term is up to 2060. So any questions about the overall framework of REAs, how we've approached it? Just a good 5-minute reminder, hopefully, of what we're going for. So these integrated products, like I said,
Jamie,
Yes.
This is Cindy up in Fairbanks. On that slide where you talked about the coarse filter and fine filter CEs, there were numbers behind the column headings. What were those numbers? I mean, there's more than 2 aquatic coarse filter CEs, so what's the 2 mean?
Yeah.
The number of management questions addressed.
Yeah, so
Okay.
these are, right, relate to the management questions that were directly related to these conservation elements.
Okay, thanks.
You know, I know we don't have any, printouts, but tomorrow, this table might actually be helpful to have as a printout, as a reference, if we're going through all the things, if you guys,
Okay.
I don't know if anyone has a few minutes, just run back and make a few printouts of this table.
Yeah.
Might be helpful.
I can run upstairs to see.
That'd be great, yeah, okay. Maybe a little lunch. Okay, so, when I'm talking about integrated analyses, I'm actually talking about multiple products that we've developed, to kind of explore that relationship between change agents and conservation elements, to get a picture at the comprehensive change, or the kind of culmination of everything acting on the landscape. So the first one is just that CE-CA relationship. Where are the CEs? Where are the CAs? Where are they going to overlap now? Where do they overlap now? Where are they going to overlap in the future? We also developed this idea of landscape integrity, a data set representing what we consider landscape integrity, and I'll go into that, which is really just what's the current condition of the landscape. We also look at conservation element status. So what's the status, what's the condition of current habitats for either these broad ecosystem categories like the coarse filters or species? What's the status of them currently and potentially in the future? And then we looked at cumulative impacts. So where, on a very broad sense, where are the most changes likely to happen on the landscape? Given all these change agents that we're modeling, where are the areas that are going to change the most according to our models? And this just provides a schematic of how all these integrated products are developed and what data sets go into it. So you can see up at the top, we have all the change agents. You can see a couple of them inform this LCM, this landscape condition model, and I'll go into that. I'll show you some examples here soon, and tomorrow I'll go into all the methods used for that. But the landscape condition model is a very quick assessment of the overall condition. It's based on human footprint plus invasive species distribution. We actually use the landscape condition model to inform landscape intactness. So we then break up the landscape into contiguous areas of high condition, and that together is what we define as landscape integrity. We also use the landscape condition model to form the status of the conservation elements. So that gives us just an idea of the overall condition of the conservation elements. And then we look at all those change agents to define the cumulative impacts. And then when possible, we look at specific change agents and their impacts on CE distribution, and that gives us our CE-CA overlap. Does this kind of make sense? This is kind of the global picture of how the integrated assessments, integrated products were developed, and what kind of data sets go into them. Okay, so I'll give you some examples of each of these. So you'll see a lot of this actually in this morning take-home message, so I won't belabor this too much, but just to step you through some of this thought process. This is what Tracy's going to show in a second, but we take these raw climate outputs. We say, okay, what does climate mean to species? And that's not always well defined, and I'll highlight that here in a second. It's a pretty big data gap actually. But in some cases, we do know there's certain thresholds and temperatures that are important for species, and so we can quantify that on the landscape, right? We can say, okay, these are good temperatures, these are bad temperatures for the species, and we can look at how those change. We then take that change, we overlap it with the distribution of the species, and we get some idea of how climate is going to be impacting this specific species, in this case it's beavers, and how maybe habitat might be increasing. So this is just one example of that CE-CA overlap, and again, you'll see plenty more examples of this throughout today and tomorrow, definitely. So this is one of the integrated products that we've developed. This is considered what we consider the core of the REA to do, is to look real briefly at where are these overlaps. Here is what we've developed for the landscape condition model, the landscape, one of the components of landscape integrity. This again just captures the relative human impact, human footprint impact, and invasive species impact, to just get a real general idea of the condition of the landscape. So it's based on impact, how impactful the activity is, and how far that impact spreads out from the source of that impact. So we get this nice continuous surface. You can see in the current and the near term, it doesn't change all that much. But you can see where the Donlin Road or pipelines might cause an impact on the landscape, but still kind of low in the overall. And then again, in the long term, we see potential roads going in. But overall, obviously very, very high intactness still for this region, or high integrity. And this distribution kind of shows that. We actually summarized this information at the 5th level HUC too, realizing that human footprint is not mapped well in this region as well. Just because an impact is localized, it could have an impact certainly in the aquatic world on the larger watersheds, and so we've summarized this at the HUC. But when you do that, you see that really the whole entire area is very, very intact or very, very high condition.
Can you just say your scale, or your legends are cut off on the slide, so it's hard to...
Yeah, well, we'll have to fix that we'll try to fix that at break. That's too bad.
You can see the colors.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you don't see that, the green is high and blue is very high. So we have very, very high landscape conditions. This breaks it down by landowner or land management status, and this actually kind of highlights some key take-homes. We see that for the most part, most federal landowners and state land ownership or management still has exceptionally high landscape conditions. There's just a couple that makes you wonder, gosh, DOD is pretty low conditions here. There's not a whole lot of DOD land, and the impact on their lands is intense, really intense. But we also see on native allotment lands that the landscape condition is lower than the rest of the land management agencies, and so that's something to consider, something to monitor in the future. I think it speaks to the regional aspect of this kind of assessment, which breaks down to, okay, we understand that overall it's a high condition, but who's contributing or where do lands maybe need to be restored or at least monitored for future change?
Do you know that? Do you know that land is actually regional corporation, or is it the village land that's really around the communities?
Could be village land too. Yeah. It's anything designated as Native American land on the land grant. So it could, very much be just mostly the communities.
Hey, on that table, one thing that might be helpful, just to remind people, is to put the acres of each of these different landowners right on this table. So you can see that, DOD is crappy, but they also only have less than 1% of the landscape, or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah, Monica had it in the first slide, and DeWalker's going to have the actual acreages and his, but we could definitely do that in the table
or percentage of land base, or whatever, just something to give a sense of.
For sure.
Proportion, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can infer probably, the DOD would have a very small slice, given that the overall landscape is super intact or super high condition, but absolutely. And so this is the other piece of the landscape integrity, is when we take that landscape condition model and we say, okay, we only want to identify the areas with top conditions, so those with a very, very high condition score on that previous slide, and we break that up into continuous blocks. We say, okay, is it all connected? And then you can calculate areas, and you can get a sense of just the really big patches that are most intact, or the relatively big patches that are still really intact versus those smaller pieces that may be intact but are really small, and so thus they're more vulnerable. And so we've kind of broken it up just into this really quick schematic of highest landscape integrity, those with still pretty high because it's still big chunks of land, and those that are vulnerable. And you can see the vulnerable patches are typically right around the communities. Those are ones being bisected by roads or some sort of other anthropogenic activity. So this just gives you a sense of how that looks. But again, intactness is still super high for the region. For the most part, most of these lands are still connected. They're of high condition, and so really nothing big is forecasted, at least according to our models, up to 2060. This just breaks it down percentage-wise. What is important, or maybe worth noting, is just this low landscape integrity. So there's areas that didn't meet the threshold of high condition plus high contiguous areas, and so that's a pretty it's a bigger slice of the landscape, then what the landscape condition model itself suggests is perhaps low integrity. And so that's something to monitor. It's only increasing in small amounts, for sure, but this is a really big region. And so, again, using this to kind of focus in on and looking at those areas that are going to most change would be, I think, relevant for management and for monitoring into the future. Yeah.
50,000 acres, what made you choose that as your increment?
Yeah, I'll go into more details tomorrow, but just as a quick, we use the Global Forest Watch thresholds for intact forest landscapes, and we applied that here. We also couched it with some work that was developed here, actually, for BLM lands designating wilderness areas. But I'll go into more details on that tomorrow.
Thanks.
So kind of the take-home from this landscape integrity piece is that, well, first, there's a huge data gap in that human footprint is not well mapped in Alaska. We had an incredibly hard time finding decent, reliable roads data, especially ones that included local community roads or access points. That was really under-mapped. And as well, we just don't have data sets for like fish cabins or even homestead agriculture out in Lime Village. I mean, that's not mapped. It's not out there. And so this is likely an underrepresentation. We're not saying that we think that the place is low condition or anything, but we know that the human footprint is not well mapped. YKL is highly intact. It obviously varies, though, by land management status. But really, I think the take-home, or something to really consider, is we can easily say, we could have even spent 5 days on this project and said, yeah, this region is intact. I mean, this did not have to take a massive exercise. But really, it's important to consider, okay, we understand it's intact. We understand it's really, really intact and high quality. But the difference between going from really super high quality to just a little less quality might be different in the overall landscape and overall ecological integrity than going from maybe medium to a low or low to very low. I mean, once an area is impacted by human activities or by invasive species, that automatically reduces the functionality in some sense. So a departure from perfect to slightly less perfect might be more important for some resources than from okay to less okay, right? So that's one thing that we should keep in mind when looking at landscape integrity. As well, we really need to consider sensitivity of boreal systems. So I come from the desert. That's where I did my PhD, and we're always talking about, okay, just because we don't have the level of development in the desert doesn't mean the impacts aren't just as big as the level of development out east. And it's because the desert systems are highly sensitive to impacts. And so that work hasn't been done up here in the boreal systems as much. And so it's really important to assess the sensitivity of boreal systems to impacts. We may be just the tip of the iceberg. We may not be seeing the impacts that have been put on the landscape already, reflected in the system, in the boreal system. So those are things to just kind of consider. We all appreciate and celebrate the fact that we have a really intact system, but it's not an excuse to kind of ignore the fact that there are still impacts on there, and better understanding will ultimately lead to better management.
Hey, Jamie, on that, one thing we heard yesterday at a completely unrelated meeting about Iditarod was that DIA has been working with the villages to identify trails that they regularly use so that they can go after DOT funding and treat them as roads and go after DOT funding, which was an interesting piece of information, but what it made me think of for these kind of things is that might be another source of information for human footprint that, like for the central Yukon plan, it might be interesting to ask BIA what they have.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's something we worked on in this a little bit, the Iditarod Trail, and how do you quantify that impact? Obviously, there's no metrics for that down in the lower 48. How do you model the impact of snow machines and dog-sled trails that are used just intensively for a short time period?
In addition to trails, they also have all the proposed roads that all these villages would like in the future as well, right? A whole different.
Yeah, very good.
BIA,
yes.
Yeah, that'd be a really good data set. Good information to get into. So, yeah. Cool. So we also use this landscape condition model to inform the status of the different conservation elements, and this just gives you a quick example of how we do that. It's really a simple overlay. We take the distribution of the conservation element, and we overlay it with the landscape condition model, and we sum up exactly where the habitats for this given conservation element might be degraded due to the landscape conditions. But again, like the rest of the landscape condition model for the whole ecoregion, it's very much intact for the most part, and not going to change a whole lot. But there are some good take-homes from this. One is that we weren't able to do specific species responses to different human footprint impacts, mostly because that's just not well defined. That's a huge, huge data gap. We don't understand exactly how. We now have some idea of roads. I mean, there's a big subdiscipline on road ecology, but very rarely do we have that for species up here in the boreal systems and Arctic systems, and even less rare do we have information on how those other impacts and how mining, how invasive species ultimately impact systems up here. And so that's kind of a big data gap. But the most habitat is really good, and this idea of realized versus potential impacts, this really just kind of captures the potential impacts. Given the current landscape conditions, this doesn't reflect actual or realized impacts, and realizing that those realized impacts could come later or could be delayed by 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. We don't know exactly how species respond to these developments or land uses or invasive species, presence of the invasive species. And this can be applied to the DETA overlap as well. That realized versus potential is an important distinction, because what we're seeing now is probably a reflection of the landscape condition 20 or 30 years ago. There are some immediate responses in species. We know that roads immediately modify the behavior, but overall, human modification, larger landscape changes are buffered a bit. So, or there's a time lag there. And then one other thing I just want to plug is that once this data set, suite of data sets are available to BLM, you can use this to inform what we call, and what we like to call, ecological integrity, where you look at the status cumulatively of all the conservation elements, because all these conservation elements were chosen to represent key ecosystem functions, both at the coarse filter and fine filter levels. And so when summed together would give you an indication of ecological integrity. It's not something we did because it's stretching a little further than what we promised and what we really wanted to dive into, because it is a big topic and something that landscape ecologists are discussing all the time, like we did at our meeting last week. But it's a potential data product that could be derived from this, so it's a good take home. And then one last thing on the cumulative analysis. Cumulative impacts assessment, and this again is just an idea of where the most changes are likely to occur on the landscape. And so we've done this at the HUC 5 level, so the kind of moderate watershed scale, and we just identified some important thresholds and all the change agents that we said if this changes X amount, it's probably going to be an impact that managers are going to have to be aware of. They're not tied to any specific species or habitat responses. These are just kind of thresholds that we think if July temperature crosses this threshold, or precip crosses this threshold, or fire frequency crosses this threshold, we would elicit some sort of mandatory response. And so this is all summed then at the 5th level HUC, and I'll go into the details more tomorrow on exactly what those thresholds are. You can see in the near term, there's only a couple of change agents that we see meeting those thresholds for most of the region, although the watersheds around Galena definitely kind of have a couple of more actors going on. But by the long term, you see pretty much the northern part of the REA is experiencing some, a significant amount of these change agents acting cumulatively. And so, again, we can't get into that cumulative nature or the feedbacks between all those change agents, just recognizing that 5 or 6 or essentially all 7 change agents or metrics of change agents that we've modeled are acting on a single watershed. That's where I would set up my monitoring places, because that's probably the place that's going to change the most or the fastest. This just breaks it up by.
So, Jamie, let me ask you, do you think, is it 5, 6, and 7? I mean, what do you think the break point is?
Yeah.
That we're worried. Is it the 5, 6, 7 that we're worried about, or is it the 4, 5? Because if it's 4, 5, 6, 7, it's pretty much the whole area.
right?
Right. I mean, I would say, you know, you can look at the individual change agents if you want specific responses, you know, because fire is a big driver, right, on this landscape. But I would definitely say, I mean, if we know that sort of the different realms of change agents are all acting, so we know landscape condition model is changing, so the human footprint's changing, plus overall climate, so the temperatures plus precip, plus permafrost, and fire, you know, where we've got those four dominant things all acting in one huck, that's probably the area that you want to focus the most effort on. Then we know everything's changing there.
Right.
At some scale, everything's going to change in that watershed.
Thanks.
And this, again, breaks it up by the landowner, or land management status, and it's just some good, I guess, dialogue creation, I think, when we kind of break it up again by these land management status, because we see, again, the American lands tend to have a higher proportion of these really impacted hucks that they're going to have to deal with. Although, I mean, if you look at those kind of top scores, certainly Fish and Wildlife Service has a substantial amount of land that's going to be impacted by 6 and 7s, by a lot of the change agents. And so this gives you an opportunity, maybe as land managers, to say, look, we're kind of sharing these hucks that are going to get potentially hammered by changes. Let's develop some sort of integrated monitoring strategy, or let's come up with some sort of vision for these landscapes that kind of address the fact that we're expecting them to change. We don't know how, but we need to at least open up those dialogues and use this as a way to kind of leverage support for cross-boundary management.
Quick question, what are the units on that table? Are they numbers of hucks, or what?
No, this is square kilometers, yeah.
I think the numbers on the top.
What?
Oh, that's
Square kilometers.
yeah, these are square kilometers, so these are areas. So it's not the number of hucks, but, yeah. And we've got this all spatially, so it'd be pretty easy to derive the huck names from this. You know, identify those specific hucks that are going to be changing the most. Okay, so the take-home from the cumulative impact is that, you know, first off, there is another key data gap here, that thresholds and change agents are not well defined. These are thresholds that we kind of came up with either statistically or just talking to different specialists, and like, well, at what point do we consider changes in precip to be important? I mean, at what point do we think that would have an impact on the overall landscape? So these are not well defined in the literature. These are obviously something that needs to be studied. It can be studied in terms of specific species response, or just in general, you know, how much change is important. And that kind of crosses the boundary between science and management, really. So an important data gap there. But that's just Galena surrounding watersheds will likely experience the most change in the near term, but the northern part in the long term, and that native fish and wildlife lands likely to see the most change. So just some overall limitations and assumptions to sort of set the stage for the rest of the talks today and tomorrow. Realizing that you know, Monica already said this was a rapid assessment. Really, we're combining this baseline data. I mean, for the most part, none of this baseline data existed for the region prior to this effort. So a substantial amount has just gone into collecting information. We didn't even have a comprehensive vegetation map for the region when we started this project. So it's rapid, and realizing that a lot of work has kind of gone into just those fundamental pieces, we do have some important limitations, and that these are models. Everything that we did here are models, and you know, just to bang on the old drum, models are not reality. You know, they're far from it.
Hey, Jamie?
Yeah.
This is Steve in Fairbanks. You know, tomorrow it sounds like you're going to get into the more details of the modeling and thresholds and things like that. But you know, are you also going to get into the confidence intervals of the modeling and the projected reliability?
We are. Yeah, we're going to address that certainly in the models that have that kind of information, the sensitivity or uncertainty kind of parameters. We will be getting into that. prediction or reliability, the limitations, yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Some of that's coming up this afternoon, actually, if you look at the agenda as to how things are broken down.
Yep, that's right.
Climate, fire, and permafrost stuff that I'm gonna be covering this afternoon, I will touch upon that and also field questions in that regard. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So, right, models are simplifications of complex systems, so, realizing that these are all models, they're also models at ecoregional scale, so this isn't gonna inform local planning, objectives. This is really at the ecoregional scale. It's more used for planning purposes. It's to identify those areas that are going to change, identify the areas where you need to monitor, identify areas where you might want to protect habitats. And we don't make true forecasts or predictions. These are models of potential change. So we're not assigning any probability to any of these changes. We're not assigning any true estimate of the likelihood of any of these coming true. These are predicted potential changes. I think we've detailed all the limitations and assumptions throughout, and you'll get a sense of that in the presentations today and tomorrow. But in the document, definitely in the technical document, we talk about the limitations, the key limitations. It's just important to realize that it's not predictions or forecasts. These are potential change. And it's not to diminish the value of these products, because I know uncertainty and words like limitations elicit different responses in different people. In the scientific world, it's really our way of saying, we're applying the best possible science, but none of us have crystal balls. We do not have that ability to forecast things with accuracy that you would expect in a short-term economic return kind of model or anything. We are doing the best available science, and so our limitations are just detailing where we understand our limitations are, where we understand the limits of our understanding, but this does to represent the best possible science, best possible information. So just want to throw that out there. And these are baseline conditions. And so like Monica said, this is just the beginning. We've done some integrated products to show the utility of the data sets. We've provided some frameworks and actually delivered with the data sets are all of our models that we've used to run all these analyses. And so literally anybody that wants to access the data on the BLM data portal in 6 months or whenever it gets up will have the ability to run these models themselves and run different combinations of these models. So we're just scratching the surface here with the potential opportunity for models and development with this data set. So,
Jamie, this is Cindy.
Yes.
Specifically, what are the models built on or built in, environment-wise? Are they ArcGIS model builder models, or are they R scripts, or?
Yeah, mostly ArcGIS model builders. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those will be all the ones that you can run from the NOC data portal. Yeah. Okay. With that, is it a break now? Where do we go? Yes.
We have some time for questions if anybody wants.
Yeah, so are there any other questions about any of these the kind of integrated products, pieces? Karen?
I actually have a question for Scott.
Can I think about this answer?
I noticed there's no one from the NOC here today.
You might check. Travis had a conflict, and I know we talked to him yesterday, so he may be on or may not. I don't still know. He's not.
Okay.
But he wanted to be.
Okay, but he's going to review this 800-page document and provide comments?
They will be part of the review. He will, he is the new, he's been with us a long time, but he is the new, I can't even think of the guy's name. Jason Taylor, and as you recall, Jason Taylor and some of us spent a lot of time with ES&K, but he will review that from the NOC standpoint, and I think Megan is involved pretty much. I don't know about from the technical review side as far as the document itself, but she's totally engaged with the data side of it.
Okay.
So, I wish those guys could have been here, but I know we had a conflict.
Okay. And then, related question, is the NOC working on figuring out how to keep this RIA stuff current in terms of rerunning
the models for all the RIAs periodically? Or is that something that's gonna devolve to each individual office to deal with, do you think?
That's a good question. I don't know. That's the basis of the models that have been built and the data that's been available. It's there so it can be rerun. Our capability and capacity to do that, and exactly who will do that, I don't know. But the idea is that it's set up that way, so we can rerun these models with the data, with what's set up. So, I have a limited amount of confidence in our ability to do that here in state, and also at the NOC level too, because the NOC has been fully engaged in this and has a limited amount of capacity. So I think they underestimated, I know they underestimated the number of data sets and the number of models that have come in from these, and hopefully in the future they will be prepared to assist each state in rerunning models, but I don't know what the capacity is.
Okay. So. Remembering that circle diagram with the REAs, you know, where it keeps flowing. I was thinking, so it seemed like with that diagram, you know, AIM was kind of the next major effort after REAs, and then kind of ecoregional direction, and then an REA again.
Actually, you know,
I don't know how it's going to be the process or not.
This program is so new, and I'd hope that since the SNK was, the 7th one, and we're now at, I can't remember, maybe 14 or 15 here with the YKL, that there would be enough progress on the earlier REAs for us to follow along and follow their lead, but that has not happened. So I do know the objective from a landscape level is to go on to ecoregional direction and do these other steps, but that all takes dedication from at the national level, and also funding at the national level. So hopefully that will be followed through with. But there's been a situation before where we've started a program that has had limited funds to spend some time doing the models over, updating the models, or something like that. So I have hope that we'll follow through with all these programs, but we'll just have to see.
How many REAs are there now?
There's about 14 or 15. And I think the Central Yukon was one of the last to be started, last to be funded. And so I think we're about to complete that cycle. I will say at the Landscape Ecology Conference, when we had the federal kind of agency panel, they brought up that landscape initiative as being a DOI-wide thing now. So it's brand new DOI-wide, so it's not just DLM that's kind of taking this approach of doing ecoregional assessments, feeding that into kind of directions and inventory and monitoring. It's DOI-wide, and so there's potentially some leveraging, some funding opportunity to kind of keep these programs going. But I will say that definitely from the data side, we're setting it up so that it's easily updatable, because we know NHD will be updated in Alaska, and that's a huge component of our aquatic models, and we wanted to make it very easy to just slot in the new data set and push go and to make all the models run again. So we've made it as simple as possible from our end to update things. I'll also say, though, we have been having conversations about ways to serve this kind of information locally. So not being dependent on the NOC, realizing that funding could go down or servers could get bogged up. And so there's some opportunities there, I think, if there's enough interested parties to set up some sort of local, Alaska-based at least, system, and maybe even opportunity for continuing to update the data sets, update the models.
I guess there was some discussion too that some of the other RIAs in other parts of the country are using databases as their kind of.
Right, exactly. Yep, and that's one of the things we're thinking about too, right?
So this is Tim in Fairbanks. I guess I'm a little bit bothered by your statement that these are just models of potential change and not forecasts or predictions. Basically what that's saying is, here's one plausible answer, and if we don't have confidence intervals or some pretty thorough sensitivity analysis of how that potential answer or that plausible answer could change, if the data that went into it is wrong or was different, then the claim that we can use this to develop further products that we're going to base management decisions on is frankly pretty scary. So if I'm not understanding that correctly, it would be helpful if that could be explained as we go through each of these. And if I am understanding it correctly, I think we really need to have a discussion about how we base management decisions on plausible answers rather than defensible confidence intervals.
Well, absolutely. And so each section will talk about the sensitivity, or at least the uncertainties involved with the modeling effort. So that will be laid out, and you can have confidence in our models. Absolutely. It's not to say that we're not confident in our modeling approaches, that we're not confident in the science, because we are. We're fully confident, and we're probably, I don't know, we are incredibly invested in this framework. Otherwise, we would have never devoted 2 years of our life to doing this in such a massive team. So we're very confident in that. We just want to spell out, put as many caveats out there so that people understand that these are still models and that they're developed at the ecoregional scale. And so just to keep mindful of the relevancy at which scale you're looking at these models and outputs and results, and really just reminding yourself that there are some uncertainties built in, and it is that difficult interface between science and management. And at what point are the uncertainties or the data quality issues or whatnot so big that we can't make management decisions based on that? And that's something we're willing to have conversations about, because it's something I'm personally interested in. But you can have a lot of confidence. We will be going through our uncertainties in these models, so you get a sense of the quality of data going in, and we've assessed the quality of the data too in other reports, and so you get a sense there too. But I don't want to belittle our effort or our results. I mean, we absolutely have confidence in these results. It's just that realizing that there are some limitations is an important step to interpretability.
Yeah, and if I could interject, I'll try to talk a little bit more about those uncertainties in my section. This is Nancy from the SNAP program. But just to plant in people's heads, I really recognize what you're saying about it being scary planning in the face of some degree of uncertainty. What we're trying to do is actually reduce uncertainty. I mean, without our model results, the potential field of what might happen is really wide open. And that's what we get people coming to us at SNAP saying, I know climate change is happening. I have zero idea where that's going to take us. If we can narrow that down, then I feel like we're doing a good job. We're not going to be able to pinpoint and say, oh yeah, there's going to be a fire in this location in this year. People understand that there's a stochastic element. There's uncertainty, and there's just this sort of built-in random element to a lot of these properties. But a lot of what we're doing, it's not so much that the models are wrong, it's that what the models do is narrow down the potential outlook and tell you what's likely. And so I think it's actually a really good thing for managers. It's a good management tool in the sense that no matter what, managers are going to be dealing with managing in the face of uncertainty. If we can make it a little clearer what's likely and what's less likely and what's plausible and what's less plausible, then I think that we'll be helping, and I hope that's what people...
So I don't think we're talking about the same issue. I think we're perfectly fine making management decisions with some uncertainty in them. That's day-to-day business. But I'm hearing two different things here. At one point it was said these aren't based on probability, but now we're saying they're saying what's likely. We have to be able to explain our confidence in what we use to the public. And if I'm not questioning what your process, or I'm saying we need to understand the level of confidence we have in this and where the uncertainty is and how we articulate that uncertainty. So I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm asking you to help explain it well enough that we understand what we're using. We can't just say, here's a plausible answer, so we're going to stick that in an environmental impact statement and base decisions on it. We get fried if we do that.
I guess I was having a little bit of a hard time with this statement too. This is Cindy, and I guess my issue with it is that if we turn around and, try and say to somebody in the public, oh, this isn't a prediction, and yet the map says right on it, this is what we would anticipate in 2060, it's a prediction. I mean, we were putting a time in the future that we would anticipate that change to be occurring. And how that's not a prediction from the public's eyes, I don't know. Because when I see a map that says this is what we would envision the situation being in 2060, I would consider it a prediction.
Yeah.
Karen, did you want to add something? Sorry, she's had her hand up.
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah. We can definitely. I think word choice is important. I chose these words based on the scientific definition of prediction. The public definition of a prediction would be different. And so, yeah, we can talk about this more. It's to really just couch the uncertainty. And so I will say that every single section we've detailed these limitations and assumptions so that you as managers can assess how reliable these predictions are. We think they're reliable, otherwise we would not include them in the assessment. We would never propagate, bad or unreliable or undefensible results. And so from the scientific perspective, we're presenting solid results. But we do want to detail those limitations and assumptions so that you as managers can say, is the science good enough? Is our understanding of the science good enough to make a management decision? Yeah, Karen?
I changed my mind, so.
Okay.
I guess the other thing, we've been talking about this a little bit with our RMPs and how to organize our alternatives. And, what we've been talking about a little bit is organizing our alternatives around these kind of different potential change vectors. But in terms of our RMP decision-making, which is only a 20 to 30-year time horizon, we'd be making those decisions based on a higher degree of confidence. But we've analyzed some of those other trajectories so that if we are starting to go down that trajectory in our 20 to 30-year management plan time frame, we have a alternative suite of decisions that we've already analyzed available to us so that we can adjust our management without having to go back through an RMP. I mean, that's kind of what we're thinking because, we're not going to, and we couldn't sustain a suite of management decisions that were headed towards a trajectory that we didn't have a lot of confidence in. Exactly. But it may cause us to say, this is the trajectory we think we're going to have for the next 20 to 30 years. These are our management decisions, but because these other possibilities are out there, we're going to manage that management in a way that doesn't preclude, that doesn't hurt us if we start going down one of those other trajectories to the extent we can. So, and how that is actually going to look in our management decision-making, I have no idea because we're not there yet. But I think that's how I envision us kind of using some of these models.
Yeah, and this is Steve. I kind of think, and I think this is what you're saying, Karen, but I can see where this may be able to help us with adaptive management type provisions to put in our RMPs based on some of these thresholds being crossed. If they do cross, how might we change our decision in the RMP? To me, that's a tool that might be helpful. And then also, I think if we are having this, the training coming up on how to use the products, that would be helpful too. There are a lot of unanswered questions, I think, about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And also,
Jamie,
sorry.
Is the temporal aspect something that we're going to be able to change and rerun in these model builder models? Not really. Only because we're defined by these time periods, by the BLM. There's some possibility, but it really depends on sort of the nature of what analyses you need to rerun, because like the climate data is really only being delivered for the current, the
2025 time period in the 2060s. So there's no intermediate time steps available from the climate perspective. But it's, it's something that might be a possibility with other data sets.
With the Northwest Florida LCC climate, analysis that's being done, I think we're looking at 2040 and 2080, so.
Right.
The climate data exists.
Climate data exists.
We'd have to run.
Exactly. So I will just say, since I've been promoting this since the beginning of this project, this is a trend assessment, what we would call a trend assessment. And I think to really get at Tim's point about, exploring the uncertainty, you have to do scenarios. And we're exploring this. We're actually teaming up with a group doing scenario analysis on the North Slope for the North Slope REA. And the potential even with Central Yukon, with the LCC there. And so the next logical step for this kind of trend assessment is to go into full suite scenarios. And I think that's actually the intent of the Ecoregional direction, is to take a scenario type approach using the REA, explore those other possible futures so that you get a more realistic idea of where the uncertainty is for these future conditions. Because really this is just trend assessment, so it's really just a possible trajectory that we're going down. But as a scenario guy myself, I feel very uncomfortable making a single prediction or a single identification of a future condition. So that's why we kind of couched it this way, is really hopefully this will lend itself well to scenario projects in the future.
This is Shelley. I just wanted to say, even though I guess early on I kind of misunderstood the, early on, like a couple of years ago when they were explaining the RIA to us, they had the other concept going on at the same time, the AIM. And so somehow sequentially I thought that after we did a RIA we would begin an AIM process, and I guess that's not necessarily true, but nonetheless the idea behind the AIM that there's data gaps and things that need to be monitored or whatever in the long term, it might be helpful either here or to jot down ideas for a future discussion on, like those vulnerable watersheds, specifically what things are we going to monitor, and that would help us refine our understanding and be able to explain it to the public on how we're which things we're paying attention to and how we're valuing them and factoring them into our future decisions. So, not that we necessarily know the answers to that now, but if we, kind of keep it in mind for, what, not only how we might characterize our future monitoring for the RMP, but, really specifically what kind of data we're looking for to help us with the climate monitoring.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a great thing if folks could jot down ideas of how to, and we've done our best to identify those data gaps that we think would be most important for monitoring these changes, and so hopefully that's set up. So I think we need to take a break.